That was the first word I ever heard from the boy. Not a hello, not a cry. Just that single brittle word carried through the evening wind like a secret being whispered too close to the ear. I had just finished closing the schoolhouse windows for the night when I saw him, barefoot, standing perfectly still at the edge of the woods behind the church. His clothes were torn, his skin streaked with dirt, but it was his eyes that made me stop moving. They weren't confused or frightened the way a lost child's should be. They were calm, old, watching me like he already knew I wouldn't be able to help myself. I stepped forward and asked where his parents were. He didn't answer. Instead, he pulled something from under his shirt, a page, folded 4 times, stiff with age. He held it out to me like it was too heavy for him to carry any more. I hesitated before taking it. The paper was yellowed, the ink almost black-blue, and the writing unfamiliar. Symbols, not letters. Curves and slashes that looked less like language and more like something that had grown on the page. "Where did you get this?" I asked. His lips moved, and I barely heard the answer. The voice gave it to me. He turned around and walked back into the woods, silent and steady, as if he'd just delivered a message and his part was over. I should have run after him, called someone, but I didn't. I stood there staring at that cursed piece of paper, feeling my heartbeat slow to a kind of unnatural rhythm. That night, I locked the page in my desk drawer and told myself I'd forget about it by morning. I didn't. And the next day, 2 children didn't show up for school. Their names were Jonah Rell and Sophie Minks, both 9 years old, both from families that had lived in Belhaven for 3 generations, the kind of kids that never missed a day of school unless fever forced them to. When they didn't show up that morning, I assumed it was just illness, until their parents arrived in a panic by noon. Neither child had slept in their beds. No one had heard anything. No broken locks, no open windows, no signs of a struggle. It was as if the earth had simply opened up and swallowed them. I wanted to tell someone about the boy, about the page, but the words stuck in my throat like they didn't belong to me anymore. I told myself it wasn't connected, that I was just shaken. But when I opened the drawer and looked at that folded page again, the ink was darker. Wetter, almost, like the symbols had bled overnight. I tried to make sense of the shapes, even traced one of them in my notebook. The moment my pen touched paper, I felt something vibrate in my jaw. Not sound exactly, more like the low echo you feel in your chest during a thunderstorm. I dropped the pen. That evening, the sheriff organized a search party. Volunteers combed the woods. Dogs barked themselves hoarse in circles. Nothing. Not a shoe, not a trail, not a hair. Just empty pine needles and a silence that began to feel too deliberate. At dusk, I found something on the front steps of the schoolhouse. Another page, folded just like the first. Same symbols. But this one had a smear of red across one edge. I convinced myself it was rust, or ink. Anything but blood. I didn't sleep that night either, and when the 3rd child disappeared 2 days later, I finally admitted it to myself. This wasn't just coincidence. Someone, or something, was delivering these pages, and they were keeping count. The 3rd child was Henry Talbot, 10 years old, lived just 3 blocks from the schoolhouse. His father found the front door open at dawn, swinging gently in the morning breeze. Henry's shoes were by the bed, his pajamas neatly folded at the foot. No sign of struggle, no note. Just gone. And taped to the inside of their front window, a page, folded, creased exactly like the others. Same ink, same symbols. But this one came with something new, a line drawn underneath the characters, a crooked hand-drawn line, like a horizon, and above it, a black smudge. That morning, I finally spoke. I brought the 3 pages to Reverend Holloway. He had a reputation in Belhaven, a man of logic as much as faith. I hoped he would dismiss the pages as childish drawings, help me sleep again. But when he saw them, his expression changed. Not fear, something worse. Recognition. "These aren't letters," he said. "They're phonetic, sound symbols, very old, not from any language taught around here." I asked how he knew. He said he had seen something similar during his seminary years, in a closed collection in Massachusetts, forbidden texts. He refused to explain more. He suggested I burn the pages, immediately, said there were things that didn't belong in this world, and some knowledge came with consequences. I didn't burn them. That night, I placed the 3 pages under my desk drawer, locked them in. But I made a mistake. I traced one of the lines again, just trying to understand the shape of the symbols. And for the first time in my life, I heard something that didn't come from the world outside. A voice, faint, whispered, from the page itself. It said only 3 words. "You are next." The next morning, my nose was bleeding. Not the kind of nosebleed you get from dry air or rough sleep. This one came with something else. Pressure behind my eyes, a deep ringing in my ears, and the unmistakable feeling that someone had been standing at the foot of my bed all night, watching. I didn't tell my parents. What could I say? That paper pages were talking to me? That my dreams had shifted into cold, soundless landscapes where a low voice chanted behind every rock? But I did go to see Martin Hayes. Martin was a boy from my class, 12, lanky, bookish. He'd once shown me a collection of coded journals he was keeping, trying to make his own language. If anyone could help me understand the symbols, it was him. I showed him the pages in the woods behind the church, away from adult eyes. Martin didn't speak for almost 5 minutes. He just stared. Then he said, "These are phonetic glyphs, like from pre-Sumerian proto-script, but they've been altered. They're reactive." I didn't know what he meant. He took a pencil, slowly copied one of the characters onto a fresh sheet of paper, and the second his hand finished the curve, the wind around us picked up. Just in that spot, just around us, whipping through the trees like something had been waiting. Martin's eyes widened. "I think we shouldn't copy them again," he whispered. But it was too late. That night, Martin vanished. His parents said he'd gone to bed after dinner, but in the morning his bed was empty. A single page was left under his pillow, this one covered edge to edge in symbols, smaller, more frantic, like someone had written them in a hurry. My mother found me at 3 a.m. that night, sleepwalking in the hallway, whispering in a voice that wasn't mine, and taped to my window was a 4th page. After Martin disappeared, the entire mood of Pine Hollow changed. The town wasn't big, barely 700 people, but word of a missing boy spread fast, and by mid-morning, search parties were scouring the woods, calling his name like it could pull him back from wherever he'd gone. I stayed quiet. I had to. How could I explain the page, the glyphs, the wind that listened? But then something worse happened. 2 days after Martin vanished, a second boy, Elijah Reese, began drawing the same symbols in the margins of his math book. Nobody had shown him. He didn't know me well, but during class, he stood up suddenly, walked to the whiteboard, and wrote one of the glyphs in perfect form. Mrs. Keller scolded him, sent him to the principal's office. He never made it there. Security footage later showed Elijah walking past the front office and straight out the school doors into the rain, barefoot. He kept walking, down the hill toward the tree line. And then, nothing. By nightfall, He was declared missing. I started noticing things. The air felt thicker in certain parts of town. Dogs wouldn't go near my house. My little sister kept waking up screaming, saying someone was knocking from inside her closet. But the scariest part? The voice. I began hearing it at night, just before sleep. A low, distant murmur, like someone reading aloud underwater. I couldn't make out the words, but the cadence was always the same, like scripture, like chanting, and every night it got a little clearer. By now, I had 5 pages. I kept them hidden in a shoebox under my bed. Each one seemed darker than the last, not in ink, but in tone, as if the paper itself absorbed something. And on the 5th page, in the center, a new symbol appeared, not drawn, but burned into the paper, circular, spiraled, pulsing. That night I woke up with it etched into my palm. By the end of that week, Pine Hollow had turned into a place nobody recognized. The sheriff's department had set up checkpoints. Flyers for Martin and Elijah were plastered on every telephone pole and gas station window. Church bells rang twice a day, not for service, but as a grim reminder. 2 boys were gone, and no one knew how or why. But I knew something, and I couldn't hold it in much longer, because the pages kept coming. Each night, without fail, I'd wake to find another lying at the foot of my bed, damp with dew but dry to the touch. The symbols were no longer just glyphs. They were evolving, resembling topographic lines, eyes, even anatomical sketches of bones and lungs, and always in that ink that shimmered like oil in the moonlight. Page 6 appeared the same night Elijah's mother was hospitalized. She'd been found in her kitchen, arms covered in scratch marks, mumbling a phrase over and over in a voice that didn't sound like hers. He sang through the teeth of the forest. The doctors said it was stress-induced psychosis. I wasn't so sure. That same evening, I visited the woods where we first found the book. I didn't tell anyone. I just felt pulled. The clearing was different now, colder, like the ground itself was exhaling frost. The tree stumps formed a shape, a circle, no birds, no crickets, just silence, heavy and waiting. And in the center of the circle lay page 7. This one had words, real words in English, scrawled between the symbols. Only the third voice will break the veil. I didn't understand it then, but I would, because that night a 3rd child went missing. The 3rd child's name was Claire Jennings. She wasn't like the others. Claire was 11, quiet, the kind of girl who drew monsters in the margins of her math homework and whispered stories to herself during recess. No one noticed she was gone until her teacher called her name during roll call Monday morning, and only silence answered. The town was already fractured, a mix of dread, denial, and whispered blame. But Claire's disappearance broke something deeper. She hadn't wandered off into the woods like the boys. Her window was locked from the inside, her bed still made. The only clue left behind was a single page, folded beneath her pillow. Page 8. Her parents didn't recognize it for what it was, but I did. I saw it on the news that night, in a shaky photo snapped by a local reporter, the same shimmering ink, the same symbols, and in the corner a small drawing of a mouth, open wide, screaming. That was the first time I realized these pages weren't just coming to me. Someone, or something, was distributing them, selectively, quietly, like invitations to a ritual we didn't know we were part of. I returned home and opened my drawer. I laid out all 8 pages in a row. That's when I saw it. Every 3rd page had real words embedded in the symbols, hidden messages. Page 3. The veil hums when the heart stops. Page 6. Only the 3rd voice will break the veil. Page 9 hadn't come yet, but I already knew what would happen when it did. 3 pages, 3 messages, 3 missing children. The pattern was unfolding in real time, and no one else could see it. I started to wonder if the town wasn't cursed, but chosen. And whoever was orchestrating this, whatever the veil was, we were already too deep inside it to walk away. 3 children, 3 pages, 3 vanishings. But it was Claire's case that broke the silence. See, Claire didn't just disappear, she changed. 2 days after she vanished, she was found standing barefoot in the middle of Old Pine Cemetery, 30 miles outside of town. Her feet were blistered raw. Her dress was soaked in black creek water. But the most haunting part? She was humming a soft, tuneless melody, over and over again. When her mother rushed to her, Claire didn't recognize her. She just stared through her, like looking through frosted glass. Her eyes were empty, her skin ice cold, and when the sheriff asked her where she'd been, she finally spoke. Only 4 words. The third voice spoke. That line. It sent shivers down my spine. I remembered page 6's message. Only the third voice will break the veil. Claire was that third voice, and something had spoken through her. After she was taken to the hospital, they ran tests. No trauma, no drugs, no explanation for the frostbite on her legs or why her vocal cords were strained like she'd been screaming for hours. But she never screamed. She never cried. She just kept humming that cursed looping tune. The news spread quickly. Reporters descended on our town like vultures, but no one could explain what was happening. Some said it was mass hysteria. Others whispered that the devil had come to collect children. A few said we were being punished. But I knew better. I knew it had to do with the pages, with the veil, with something older than any of us. That night, I returned to my room and opened the drawer. There was another page, page 9. And this time, it wasn't just symbols or whispers, it was a map. A hand-drawn diagram of the woods north of town, with a single red X marked deep inside the tree line, and underneath it, scrawled in the same shimmering ink, "The choir waits." I waited until just before dawn. The streets were empty. My parents still believed I was shaken by Claire's return. They had no idea I'd hidden another page. I slipped out with nothing but a flashlight, a pocket knife, and page 9 folded in my coat. The woods north of town were older than memory. Folks said the trees were planted by hands that never left bones behind. Even birds avoided them. The deeper I went, the colder it got, though it was July and the sun was beginning to rise. The map was eerily accurate. Every curve in the trail, every crooked stump, it was all there, drawn before me, like the page knew this place. And when I reached the red X, I understood why. There was a clearing, maybe 20 feet across, choked with wild thorns and ancient stones. At its center stood a small wooden box, half buried under the roots of an ash tree. The ground around it was burned, blackened in a perfect circle. When I touched the box, the earth trembled, just slightly, like something deep underground had shifted its weight. Inside the box was page 10, and this time, the ink pulsed. It was still wet, but there was more, a cassette tape, unlabeled, taped to the back of the page. When I held the page up to the light, words began to rise. Invisible ink drawn out by the morning sun. If heard before prepared, the choir will sing through you. I didn't know what that meant yet, but I felt it, deep in my stomach, that whatever was on that tape wasn't meant to be heard alone. Back home, I hid the page and the tape beneath the floorboards. That night, I called Marcus and Jonah. "I found something," I said. "A page. And a voice." We waited until midnight. Marcus brought his dad's old cassette player, the kind with heavy chrome buttons and a hum that made the silence feel louder. Jonah was jittery, glancing over his shoulder every few seconds like someone might be watching. We locked the door, drew the curtains, and laid page 10 flat on the floor. It pulsed. Not like it was glowing. No, more like it was breathing. The ink shimmered under the lamplight, and the handwritten symbols danced around the edge of the paper in slow, steady spirals. Marcus slipped the tape in. He pressed play. At first, nothing, just static. Then, buried under the hiss, a sound. Not music. Not a voice. It was many voices. Layered, disjointed, overlapping in a way that made your brain want to tear itself in half trying to listen. Children whispering in reverse. A woman reciting numbers like a prayer. A low, wet moan that rose and fell like waves on a diseased shore. And beneath it all, something ancient. Something that didn't speak in words, but in weight. The sound of something thinking. We didn't make it a full minute. Jonah screamed. His nose started bleeding. He ran to the bathroom and vomited bile. Marcus tore the tape out and smashed the stop button. We sat in silence, hearts thudding, ears ringing. When I looked down at the page, it had changed. The symbols were gone. In their place, a single line, freshly written. 3 have heard. 3 must now serve. Jonah refused to come back after that night. Said he heard his mother's voice in the tape, but his mother had died 5 years ago. Marcus didn't say much, just kept staring at the cassette in his hand like it might blink. Me? I knew the pages weren't done. They'd started speaking, and they were just getting warmed up. The next morning, Pinebrook felt different. It wasn't the weather, though the sky had gone gray and heavy, like it was holding its breath. It wasn't the people, though the few we passed on the street avoided our eyes, as if sensing something clinging to us. It was something deeper, quieter, the kind of change that seeps in beneath the skin and makes the world feel unfamiliar. Marcus didn't come to school that day. Jonah's mother told the principal he'd been admitted to a clinic out of town. Something about stress, nightmares, loss of speech. He wasn't the only one. That week, 2 more kids from the 6th grade stopped talking. One of them, Grace Liddell, was found scribbling strange circles onto her desk with the tip of a compass, murmuring to herself in a language no one recognized. The other, Charlie Boone, tried to swallow a nail. Every one of them had come into contact with page 10. And something was wrong with Marcus. Not like Jonah. Marcus functioned. He went to class, took notes, even laughed when the teacher cracked a bad joke. But he didn't blink. His pupils looked too large, and when I caught him muttering in the hallway, I realized he wasn't talking to himself. He was answering something no one else could hear. He passed me a note during gym class, folded 4 times, written in the same shaky pen I recognized from the page. The book is never finished. It writes itself with every voice it takes. I should have walked away then, burned the pages, told someone. But I didn't, because that night in my own room as I tried to sleep, I heard it. A whisper, right behind my ear. It said my name, and then, turn the page. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? The whisper didn't come from a dream. It came from the dark space between my pillow and the wall. Too close, too clear, and it knew my name. When I sat up, the room was still, but the paper on my desk, the one Marcus had given me, was gone. In its place was another page, thicker, older, yellowed around the edges like parchment forgotten in a vault. It wasn't in my handwriting. The ink looked wet. My hands trembled as I reached for it. The words were in English now, or some version of it. Twisted phrases, half poetry, half command. I recognized only fragments. 3 who speak become the bridge. Voices bind. Voices break. The ledger takes what it hears. There was a symbol drawn at the bottom. 3 open mouths arranged in a triangle, inked so dark it bled through the page. That was the first time I noticed the sound. A low, constant hum, like breath caught in a throat, not from outside, not from the house. It was coming from me. The next morning, I called Marcus. His voice was hollow, like he'd been awake for days. I asked him about the new page, about the whispers. He just said, "It doesn't want to be read. It wants to be heard." Then he hung up. The same day, Grace Liddell vanished. Her parents said she walked out of the house barefoot in the middle of the night. They found her journal open on the bed. She'd filled 30 pages with the same phrase, "I turned the page, I turned the page, I turned the page." After that, school closed for a week. The principal said it was for grief recovery. But we knew. The book was spreading, and it had just started reading us. By the 3rd week, 3 kids had vanished: Marcus, Grace, and now Darren. All 3 had touched the pages, and all 3 had started to speak in their sleep before they disappeared. Our town tried to act normal. Pastor Hill gave a sermon about protecting the innocence of youth, and Principal Greer handed out pamphlets on teen mental health. But we knew they were scared. Adults were locking their doors before sunset. Children weren't allowed outside after school. And me? I stopped sleeping altogether. Because now I had started hearing the voices. It didn't matter if the pages were near. I could be in the shower, or eating dinner, or walking past the old rail yard. The voices were always 3, a girl's whisper, a boy's laugh, and a third one, low, choking, unfinished, like someone trying to speak underwater. They didn't just whisper. They called. And one night, I answered. I don't know why I did it. Maybe curiosity, maybe loneliness. But I whispered back, "What do you want?" And the third voice replied for the first time in full, chilling words, "Another." The next day, there was another page on my desk, but this one was different. It had a diagram. 3 figures, 3 mouths, a circle drawn between them. Beneath it, instructions. Not in English, but I knew what they meant. Somehow, I understood it. I didn't tell anyone, not even Lauren. But she noticed I was shaking all the time, and one night she asked, "Do you think it's our fault?" And I said the quiet part out loud. "No, I think it's our turn." We weren't reading a story anymore. We were writing it, and the ledger had already chosen its next line. Lauren was the first to suggest recording the voices. We were both too afraid to tell adults what we'd seen, let alone heard. But Lauren had an old handheld cassette recorder her dad used for interviews. She brought it to the treehouse where we'd been hiding the pages. "It's proof," she said, her eyes rimmed red from lack of sleep. "If we can catch it, maybe we can stop it." I didn't believe that. Not really. But I wanted to believe her. So we waited until nightfall, surrounded by wind and pine, and pressed record. The tape ran for 4 hours. At first, nothing. Then came the clicks, the faint static, then laughter. A child's laughter, distant and broken, as though coming from behind a wall. Then the whispering started. Soft syllables, layered atop each other, growing louder. And then the third voice. It didn't speak this time. It groaned, like something ancient and broken was trying to remember how to breathe. When we played the tape the next day at school, privately, in the back of the library, Lauren vomited halfway through. I kept listening. I don't know why. Maybe because I started recognizing what the voice was trying to say. It was mimicking us. Fragments of things we'd said to the pages, to each other, twisted, repeated, sometimes in reverse, sometimes layered with other sounds, scratching, screaming, water dripping. The voice was feeding on our memories. And then we saw it, A new symbol on the last page, one we hadn't noticed before. It looked like an ear, with a mouth inside it. The ledger wasn't just meant to be read, it was meant to be heard. And the more we listened, the more it remembered us. When the tape ended, I turned to Lauren and asked, "Do you still want to stop it?" She didn't answer, because her nose had started to bleed. And behind us, the tape recorder clicked back to life, on its own. We burned the first tape. We thought it would end there, erase whatever we'd captured, stop the whispers from crawling back into our ears each night like insects made of memory. But by morning, Lauren's recorder had another cassette in it, one we didn't put there. Labeled in red ink, "Listen again." We didn't, not at first. We threw it deep into the woods behind the school, buried it beneath stones. But that night, the same voice played from Lauren's bedroom wall. Through the wall, she said, like her house had started to breathe. I was losing sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard that broken mimicry. Bits of prayers, names of the dead, even the sound of my father coughing before he left the house that last morning. But worse than the echoes were the voices that didn't belong to us. A language we hadn't spoken, chanting we hadn't learned. One night, my little sister woke up screaming, swearing I had stood in her room whispering nonsense in the dark. I had been asleep in the garage. That's when we realized the book was broadcasting. Not just remembering us, but expanding, projecting itself like radio static into other rooms, other minds. And not everyone could hear it, only the ones it marked. 2 boys in the neighboring town drowned that week. Both were found with their ears filled with ink. No ink was spilled at the scene. A librarian in town went missing after checking out a book on Mesopotamian cuneiform. Her office walls were covered in scratched-in glyphs that looked like the ledger's symbols. She had used her own fingernails. And then, at the center of it all, our pages began to change. The text wasn't stable anymore. Sentences rearranged themselves. Phrases we remembered writing had disappeared. But new ones had appeared in their place, and they were signed, with our names, in a language we'd never learned. By mid-November, none of us were sleeping properly. Not because we didn't try, but because the ledger wouldn't let us. Its pages had started rewriting themselves in real time. We'd sit in Lauren's basement and watch as the ink moved, not smeared, not faded, moved. Letters crawled across the parchment like worms, twisting into shapes we hadn't written, and each time a small note would appear at the bottom of the page. Witnessed. We stopped writing in it. That didn't help. One afternoon, Lauren opened the book and found a passage describing an argument I'd had with my mother that morning. Down to the exact words, the slammed door, the way I clenched my jaw. We hadn't recorded it. We hadn't even spoken about it. That's when Lauren proposed something we hadn't dared suggest before. Maybe the ledger wasn't recording us. Maybe it was creating us. It was a horrifying idea, that we weren't writing the book, but the book was writing reality, or worse, rewriting it. Timelines, memories, conversations, bending moments to fit a story it wanted told. We began testing it. One by one, we wrote things down, not truths, but lies, small ones. Like Lauren didn't come to school today, when she was sitting next to us. But by the end of the day, the attendance sheet showed her as absent. A substitute had taken notes for her class. She had no memory of being marked missing. Another time, I wrote that Mr. Dyer, our history teacher, had a nosebleed in class. Within 5 minutes, he paused mid-lecture and bled all over his desk. We stared. He stared back. The blood hit the floor in slow motion. The book wanted attention, and when it got it, it grew bolder. Symbols began appearing outside the pages, on our bedroom windows, bathroom mirrors, even once carved into the bark of the old elm tree behind the church. None of us had done it. Then came the realization that broke us. The ledger didn't just know us, it needed us, and it was beginning to ask for more. It was December 2nd when it finally spoke out loud. Not through one of us, not through dreams or pages or visions, but through a voice recorder Lauren had hidden in her closet. We'd grown paranoid by then. Too many strange events, too many coincidences. Lauren wanted proof, something we could play back, something real. She left the recorder running overnight in her room. When she played it back the next day, most of it was silence, then static, then a whisper. Not a name, not a warning, just one word dragged out in a voice that sounded neither human nor mechanical. Continue. That was it. We listened to it 10 times, 20. It never changed, never became clearer. But the word felt like a command, like the book knew we were getting scared, like it was reminding us who was really in control. From that day forward, the pages no longer needed our ink. New entries wrote themselves, at night. Every morning, we found something new. December 3rd, one will be lost before the week ends. December 4th, the boy in blue carries doubt. December 5th, they will lie. Do not forgive them. And then, on December 6th, the mouth must be opened. We didn't know what it meant, but by now, fear had become part of our routine. We were numb to it. We stopped telling our parents. We lied to teachers. Every free moment was spent trying to decode the symbols and whispers. That same week, Lauren's little sister stopped speaking. She wasn't sick. She wasn't hurt. She simply woke up one morning and refused to talk. She would just sit in her room, humming tunelessly, tracing patterns onto the wall with her fingers, patterns that matched the ones in the ledger. We begged Lauren to take the book to a priest, a rabbi, a historian, anyone. But she refused. It's ours now, she said, and I think it's almost finished telling its story. We didn't realize until later. She didn't mean our story. She meant its story, and it was about to write its final chapter. By mid-December, none of us was sleeping properly. The book had stopped adding pages, but something worse had begun in its place. Audio interference. It started with Ethan, who stayed up late gaming. He told us his headphones would fill with static out of nowhere, always around 3:15 a.m. Then, beneath the static, voices. Faint, layered, repeating. Not words exactly, more like sounds trying to become words. He thought he was losing it, until Jamal reported the same thing while listening to the radio. Then, Lauren said her baby monitor picked it up too. A crackling pulse, rising and falling, like breathing through electricity. It wasn't long before we started recording the signals. When we played them back, it didn't sound random anymore. Beneath the layers of static was a rhythm, a pattern, something ritualistic, like a chant recorded in another dimension and broadcast through broken machines. One night, we played a 15-minute loop in the basement of Lauren's house, just to see if anything happened. The lights dimmed, the walls felt warmer, and when the chant reached its final minute, something slammed against the basement door. We ran upstairs and locked ourselves in the kitchen, hearts pounding. Lauren played the recording again at half speed. That's when we heard it. Under the chant, beneath the static, was a voice whispering from the background. Finish the mouth, open the child. None of us knew what that meant, but we all stared at Lauren's little sister, still silent, still tracing the same pattern into the wallpaper every day. That symbol, that mouth. It had teeth now, sharp ones. The next night, Jamal tried to burn the book. We all stood in the backyard, watching the flames hit the pages. It didn't burn. It hissed. And for the first time, we felt the earth beneath us shake, just slightly, but enough to know we had just made a terrible mistake. The ledger was no longer content being studied. It wanted to be heard, We thought we could ignore it, shut the book, seal the recordings, throw them in a locked drawer. But the black ledger had already taken root in our lives. It didn't need us to read it anymore. It started following us. Jamal was the first to say it out loud. "I think it knows when I'm alone." He wasn't wrong. By late December, we all had stories. Lights flickering exactly when we stepped into empty rooms. TVs turning on with black screens whispering through the static. Phones ringing with no one on the other end. Just the chant, distorted and low, repeating like a prayer stuck on loop. One night, I went to bed early, head pounding, stomach tight. I turned off all the lights. No music, no background noise. But as I lay there, eyes closed, I heard it. A rustling, like pages turning, slow, deliberate, inside the walls. Then, a breath, right next to my ear. I bolted upright. Room empty. Nothing out of place. But I knew I hadn't imagined it. The ledger didn't need to be read anymore. It was reading us now. Jamal started recording his sleep again. Night after night, he captured hours of nothing. Until December 27th. At 2:44 a.m., his mic picked up something. First, a heavy, wet, dragging sound, like feet shuffling across damp wood. Then, a whisper, 2 syllables, croaked from a dry throat. "Feed me." That night, we found the black ink dripping down the wall in his room, dripping upward. It was forming the same symbol, but it had changed again. The mouth was no longer empty. Inside it now sat a black eye, unblinking, slit-pupilled, watching. And the next morning, Lauren's sister spoke for the first time in days. But it wasn't in English. It wasn't in any language. It was ledger speech. And we understood it. Every single word. We should have run when the girl spoke. We should have burned the book, the recordings, the whole damn house. But instead, we listened. And what she said was a warning. 4 will fall. 1 will carry the name. The ledger lives until its ink runs red. None of us could explain how we understood the sentence, but we did. Not through translation, not through memory, through something older. It bypassed language and struck somewhere behind the eyes, in the folds of fear we didn't know we had. After that night, the children changed. They stopped reacting to their names. They stopped crying when left alone. They began writing, not with pencils, but with their fingers, drawing that same eye-mouth symbol into condensation, into dust, into frost on windows. One boy in particular, Noah, began humming. At first it was just a tuneless melody, but when we played back his hum through the same reverse filter audio tools we'd used on the ledger recordings, it matched exactly. Exact pitch, exact rhythm. As if he were remembering something none of us had taught him. Lauren broke down completely. "It's using them," she whispered. "The book doesn't want readers anymore. It wants vessels." We kept the kids separated, monitored, protected, but it was too late. On January 3rd, at 4:13 a.m., the motion cameras picked up all 6 children standing in perfect stillness in the main hallway, eyes open, not blinking, staring directly at the basement door. They didn't move for 9 minutes, and then, in unison, they spoke. "We are the voice now. The ledger breathes." After that night, the physical book stopped showing up. We turned over every inch of the facility. Gone. But we'd already failed. The ledger had moved inward, into the minds of children, into their dreams, into the future. We tried to intervene. Every specialist was called in, child psychologists, neurologists, even a trauma-informed priest from Santa Fe who had experience with so-called mass possession. Nothing worked. The children would sit quietly, smile politely, and say things that didn't sound like children at all. "This is not madness," one girl said during a session. "It's inheritance." Their parents, those who hadn't already removed them from the study, began breaking down one by one. One mother scratched her own ears until they bled, screaming that she could still hear her son writing in his sleep. Another refused to enter the same room as her daughter, claiming the girl's breath would fog glass into patterns she couldn't unsee. We conducted blood work on the children. What we found didn't make sense. Elevated dopamine, cortisol, and adrenaline levels, but no signs of distress. One of the researchers whispered, "They're in a heightened state of awareness, permanently." They weren't just experiencing something. They were becoming something. That's when the drawings began. Each child, at different times, with no communication between them, began to sketch a strange object, a thick black circle, surrounded by jagged shapes that resembled tongues, eyes, and skeletal hands. But it wasn't random. The measurements, proportions, and orientation were identical across all drawings, even down to the millimeter. It was a sigil. Lauren wept when she saw them. "It's a map," she whispered. "A map of the voice itself. It wants to be reborn." We had two options: shut it all down, or give in to the terrifying urge to see what happens next. But deep down, most of us already knew the truth. The black ledger was no longer ink on paper. It was alive, and it was writing itself through them. You said it happened on a windless morning in early April. Lauren didn't show up for the daily meeting. No calls, no messages. We found her office empty, but something else sat waiting on her desk. One final entry in the black ledger. Unlike the rest, this page was written in both ink and blood. Her handwriting, but thinner, tighter, almost carved into the paper. There were no sentences, only symbols, dozens of them, each one drawn with precision that felt inhuman. Attached was a voice recording. Her final words, whispers. "If you're hearing this, then I'm already gone. I couldn't stop it. The ledger. It's complete now. It speaks without pages. It breathes through memory, through sound. I translated the last symbol. It doesn't mean death. It means exchange. I gave myself for silence. Don't follow me." We tracked her to an abandoned chapel just outside Black Hollow. Candles burned in a perfect circle around her body, cold, rigid, her face twisted in both agony and peace. In her hand was a charred fragment of the ledger. The final page had been burned. And yet, the children still wrote, still heard it. The truth came slowly, like ink soaking into cloth. The ledger didn't need to survive physically. It had been copied, spoken, engraved into the minds of those who had heard it. The symbols were mnemonic, viral, passing from thought to thought like a contagion. Somewhere in that small Colorado town, in the isolated corners of what we thought was science, we had birthed something old, something that had waited centuries for a voice, and now it had hundreds. We disbanded the project. Every copy of the recordings, the pages, the analysis, destroyed. But you can't unring a bell. You can't unhear the voice. And once the black ledger is inside you, it never leaves. You said, "Years have passed. We've scattered, those of us who survived. Some changed names. Others vanished completely. A few never made it out of Black Hollow. But I write this not as a confession, and not as a warning. I write it because the ledger demands it. It always demands." I haven't touched the original pages in over a decade, haven't listened to the recordings, haven't spoken a single symbol out loud, but they still live in my mind, etched like scars I never consented to bear. Sometimes late at night I wake up whispering the phrases. Sometimes I see the glyphs carved into the frost on my window or folded into the lines of my palm. Last winter, I saw a child draw one in the dirt outside a gas station, a perfect rendering of symbol number 38. He smiled at me, asked if I liked the sound it made. I never said a word. The research community officially ruled it a psychological contagion, mass hysteria born from isolation, trauma, and a shared obsession. But I know better. We all do. The Black Ledger was never a book. It was a doorway. It let something through, and now it waits, in whispers, in symbols, in forgotten syllables passed from child to child like a secret game. The further it spreads, the quieter it gets. But the silence is just the sound of breath being held before a scream. So if you find pages that shouldn't exist, if a child hums a tune with no origin, if you feel something listening from behind your dreams, do not read, do not translate, do not speak. Because the ledger only needs one more voice to become complete, and the final word might be yours.